All right, we're starting off with the fabled 10-man roster. Emily Rand's
Ooh.
topic. So you're starting
Yes.
us off on the show today, Emily.
Yeah. So basically, I think the examples that most people will point to from North America, obviously Team Liquid came out and said with their acquisition of Nori, like that was kind of their headlining acquisition, but a few other players we saw, Slushi and Conquan playing. A lot of teams are going to, and we'd previously touched upon this with TSM, a lot of teams are going towards picking up subs to build out a 10-man roster. So I wanted to reopen this discussion because 10-man rosters are something that I've personally been a little shaky on, even though I've seen the best iteration of like substitutions, and that's from SKT. And I know like SKT is kind of the team that everyone loves to cite, where when people started picking up subs and started rotating through them after the sister teams condensed in Korea and SKT kept swapping between Easyhoon and Faker, everyone was like, oh, we're going to do that because it worked for them. And that's kind of still the example that I feel like people reach out and hold up as like, this actually works. Look at SKT in 2015. Look at SKT now with just last night they had the Huni and Peanut group and then the Blank Untara group. But that is, in my opinion, one outlier to 10-man rosters actually working. So I guess, what do we think of them? What do we think of all of these substitutions that are going on in the LCS? Do we think that teams are actually going to use these players? Or are they just bringing them on as another method of preparing for franchising and having an academy team? How do players even feel like that, like feel about it? Because like, I don't know, if I were a player, I'd want to know that I was starting. And I think only SK Telecom and a few other teams can get away with benching players for like swapping out lines and stuff.
So
I would say
my question.
yeah.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to go all the way back to the top where we're talking about SKT. It's like how much can we even call SKT's 10-man rostering a success? I think the one mechanism that you can definitely say a success is kind of a success is like the swapping out mechanism. But often there's always like a feeling that when they have subs and starters, there's one player who just like feels worse for the team. And the team just seems to play way better with the other iteration. Like obviously right now, the big example is Blank Peanut, right? Where the team just plays better with Blank at the moment. So in that regard, I kind of feel like it's not even, SKT is not even like the pinnacle of success that a 10-man roster wants to achieve. Because I think the only thing SKT's 10-man roster really, really does well is like the refresher aspect, which is like everyone is kind of down after a loss. You swap out a player, something's changed. Yeah, all right, we're here. We're ready to win the next game. And I think that that's like the only aspect that's really, really definitively a success for SKT. So I'm still kind of I'm calling SKT's 10-man roster hugely amazing.
The only addendum... Oh, go, Mark.
Oh, no, you can go.
Oh, no, I was going to say the only addendum to that I'd have is we have... I think the reason why people hold up SKT as a success, because I actually agree with you. I think in certain... Like, right now, it's obvious to me that Blank is the better jungler for SKT. But in terms of citing specific reasons why SKT swap players, I wanted to add that another thing that I think they have done pretty well is adjust to meta by swapping players. So like, I know people were super mad about Faker being subbed out for Easyhoon, and then he came out in 2016 and had this like magnificent Azir that had yet to be seen because they kept swapping in Easyhoon to play that champion. But I do think that's another way that rosters can be used. But even then, there's always a better 5-man iteration for a specific meta or the champions that they want to play.
I don't even know. I kind of feel like to an extent
say.
SKT was just sort of playing poorly. That's why I don't even know if it was meta. It was like weird. Like Faker was just kind of playing worse. I don't know. Kind of like he is. No, go ahead.
I was gonna say
Southern
that, like
Sky. No.
any time that they have like a 10-man roster, there's like two things people want to do. They want to like develop players and then like have strategic depth or something like that. And to the point that like usually the strategic depth you're adding doesn't benefit enough to offset the chemistry that the best version of your 5-man roster has. The example with the Easy Whom one did seem like the strategic value was maybe worth because Faker wasn't like absolutely smashing people at that time frame, and it made it look better than it would if like that wasn't an instance where Faker was like full god mode. So I kind of agree that they're the best example of it working, and the fact that we've been talking about this shows that it's not like a super compelling like thing to go for, right? The fact that like our shining example is one that we have to like talk in and out about the benefits of.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this last week, I think, and weren't we speculating that part of this might be because of the franchise thing? Like, the question is, would you have all these 10-man rosters popping up if the format for LCS and the system of it wasn't changing next year?
I think that might be part of it. I think a lot of it is just more money, because like LPL and LCK teams were doing this just when there was more money, and I think LCS teams like to copy trendy things, as we also said last year, and I think that was even your point. But the other aspect of it is, I think like fatigue is a consideration because there are more games.
Yeah.
But one thing also that I remember when G2 brought on Expect, and originally it was like Kikis was agreeing to share the roster with Expect, but then he came back and he was saying things like, I was surprised by how much more I felt like I was falling behind because I didn't get as many practice games. I didn't get as many scrims. I didn't get as many matches in general, and that's why he decided to leave G2. So I thought that was an interesting thing to add to the question of like, because I haven't heard that particular piece of information from a lot of different places.
I know Golden Glue said the same thing with like Link, was like when they were swapping playing time, it just felt like both of them were behind the curve and falling further because they were splitting time a little bit earlier on in the season before TL completely moved away from the idea of Link.
Yeah, I was going to say I've interviewed a couple of players that have split positions, and like I had an interview that came out with Inori today actually, about even though how he really loved Phoenix One and he kind of made a name for himself in Phoenix One, and Phoenix One was like this family to him, being substituted in and out with Meteos was actually like really detrimental to his confidence, and he didn't really like the way he was performing on stage because, you know, less practice time meant that he wasn't as confident going into games, and it kind of like, you know, snowballed where he just wasn't as confident of a player, and it obviously affected his performance. I mean, it's similar to like, I don't know, I know people hate traditional sports analogies, but like people always say that if you don't know who your quarterback is going to be, it's always a bad thing because it means you're swapping through having them have like so many reps in practice instead of having one person that you can rely on get all the reps in practice and be in a lot better shape to play on game day. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm just not a fan of 10-man rosters, I guess, but I think fatigue is a really good point, and I also think that like when metas shift, it's good to have players that you can substitute in if a player is struggling really, really, really badly. Like, for example, I do think, even though people will probably disagree with me on this, I do think substituting Blank in for Bengi last year, when Bengi was really struggling, like they had him on Udyr, and I think he played Rumble, and it was bad. The only champion he looked any way competent on was Elise. And even though Blank had very visible mistakes, I actually agreed with the substitution because the team played better when Blank was in because his champion pool and his playstyle suited the meta a lot better than Bengi's.
Yeah, the one thing that we haven't really touched on that I've had owners tell me is that being in a position to having somebody that is at any given point in time ready to step in for your role is a great way of keeping players motivated. Because, you know, like there's often times where players might get distracted because they start dating someone or they just get lazy, or they start
Are
playing
you
World of
talking
Warcraft.
about double lift?
I'm talking about like half of the LCS throughout its history. Not to start a crumbs conversation type here, but it is very easy for players to get burned out or distracted, and having somebody that is like biting at their heels to try and get in is a pretty good way of keeping them ready. And I do agree. I generally think that like the 10-man roster thing, like rarely will we see it be played. Like it's very hard to imagine any of these teams even having a point in time where like throughout the split they play every single player. You know what I mean? Like how many of these 10-man rosters are actually going to see all 10 players get played at some point in time during a split? I would be surprised if it's one of them. Maybe we'll see something. I don't know. But
Maybe TL.
Maybe Mark.
They've used everyone so far, right?
Have they?
They've used 8 players. Yeah.
Oh yeah, but they don't have the full 10-man, right?
They don't. Yeah, they don't. As far as I know, they don't have a substitute for Piglet or Lorlo, right?
Yeah, those are the 2 that haven't been swapped out
I mean,
yet.
it's the year of Lorlo, so you probably wouldn't get even a substitute for him. But
It's gonna be a strong second half of the year, right?
Yeah. So I don't know. I think I will just be surprised if we see all 10 go in. Maybe Team Liquid because they're crazy and zany, but I just doubt it.
Yeah, usually it's the bottom teams that are swapping players a lot more because they're just like desperate to find something. At least this is what I see in LPL a lot, where it's like, oh, this team has 4 different 80 carries throughout the course of the split, and they're all getting played, and it's not really changing anything because you don't know how to use bounce waves when you do lane swaps. Yeah, okay, excellent, let's move on.
Yeah, same problem in NA, where like it's the bottom teams like, let's try all tech for LOD. That'll fix our problems, where like we play only around someday. It's like, what? How's that fix your problem?
So is the general feeling here that 10-man rosters are more about PR and marketing and also just about like motivation than it is actually a real thing where you start to see like, yeah, we actually have 10 players that can sub it at any given point in time?
I think I wouldn't say it's like all for PR and marketing. I think like the idea of, especially next split, like we said, you will need 10 players most likely. Like if you have some signed, it just makes it easier in the future, especially if they're half decent players that you've signed. And then I think like in terms of strategic value, there's usually not much, because the reason subs are used in traditional sports is because people get fucking tired during the game. And that doesn't happen in esports. So you don't need to sub someone out, whereas like you need to sub people out at almost every position in every sport, minus like a goalie or quarterback. So I don't think you'll see that in sports, where you're going to see like very heavy roster rotations, because ideally your 5 best players are your 5 best players. Like basketball, they would never come out of the game if they didn't get tired.
I think, the other aspect is the G2 vacation method, where they bring in some subs so that their Korean players can have a longer vacation. One thing, I would be interested to see more of these subs move in-house, because even if they aren't getting like scrim and practice time, like the benefit of the team environment and that kind of rigor, if they're really young and they've never been part of a team, like seeing how scrims work, all these sorts of things could theoretically be beneficial. So that's something that I think might be interesting if it happens. We're not really sure.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of benefits, but not all of them tie into like mid-series substitution or like today we're using a different roster.
Mm-hmm.